The morning was quiet, too quiet. The kind of gray, sleepy silence that settles over a small roadside diner just outside Denver where nothing dramatic ever happens. The truckers chewed their breakfasts slowly, the radio hummed old country tunes, and the waitress wiped down the counter with the same tired rag she'd probably used 1,000 times before. Life was ordinary. Predictable. Safe, until the door opened, and everything changed. A little boy stepped in. Thin. Pale. Lost. His jacket hung off him like it belonged to a stranger. His eyes didn't shine like an 8-year-old's should, they flickered with the haunted emptiness of someone who had forgotten what protection feels like. People looked, then looked away, because pain makes us uncomfortable. But one man didn't look away, Jack Bear Dalton. A giant in worn denim and a Hell's Angels vest patched with old battles and broken pasts. A man who had once been violence before life taught him the cost of it. A man who now craved silence because silence didn't hurt anyone. The boy walked straight toward him, not to the waitress, not to the counter, not to anyone who might seem safe on the surface. He chose the man with scars, and when he reached Jack's table, he didn't speak. He simply lifted his sleeve. The diner froze. Breath stopped. Time stumbled. Finger-shaped bruises, dark, fresh, violent, covered his small arm. Jack's world narrowed to a single heartbeat. Who hurt him? Why come to him? What did this child see in a man like Jack? The boy's trembling voice finally broke the silence. Dad. And that one word lit a fire Jack thought he'd buried years ago, because angels don't always have wings, sometimes they ride motorcycles. The small diner on Highway 285 had never been a place for miracles. It was the type of establishment truckers pulled into because their eyelids were getting heavy or because their thermos coffee had gone cold. The neon sign outside flickered half the time, the booths were torn at the edges, and the only thing always warm was the attitude of the waitress named Marlene. That morning, gray clouds pressed low over the sky like a warning no one was paying attention to. Inside, the air smelled of bacon grease, hot griddles, damp coats, and endless refills of burnt coffee. A country song played from the old radio, the kind you could barely hear over the sizzling of eggs on the grill, and in the far corner, occupying an entire booth by himself, sat Jack Bear Dalton. He didn't fit in the booth. His shoulders were too broad, his frame too large, his presence too powerful. The leather vest he wore was worn down by years of sun, dust, fights, and long highway rides. The patches stitched across it read Hell's Angels, a name that made most people look twice before approaching. Jack wasn't a man who smiled often. Life had taken that from him early, somewhere between losing people he loved and becoming someone other people feared. But he had changed. The club had given him structure, purpose, a version of brotherhood that felt more honest than anything he'd ever known. He wasn't a saint, not by a long shot, but he had rules now. He had control, and he wanted one thing that morning: peace. Silence. Space to breathe. He sat quietly, hands wrapped around a mug of steaming coffee that he hadn't yet sipped. His eyes stared through the window at the empty highway stretching toward the mountains. Sometimes the road gave answers. Sometimes it only gave more miles. He didn't expect the answer to walk through the diner door. The bell jingled softly. Jack glanced up the way a man does when sound interrupts an otherwise predictable morning. What he saw wasn't a trucker, or a traveler, or a ranch hand. It was a child. A boy no older than 9. Small. Fragile. Wearing a jacket far too big for him. His thin fingers gripped the fabric like he was trying to use it as a shield. His hair was messy, his shoes worn, and his eyes, they were hollow in a way that no child's eyes should ever be. Pain lived there. Quiet pain. Deep pain. Marlene stepped forward gently, her motherly instinct kicking in. Well, sweetheart, she asked kindly, where are your parents? But the boy didn't answer. He didn't even look at her. His gaze drifted slowly around the room, scanning each face, weighing something none of the adults understood. and then his eyes landed on Jack. Something changed in that moment. Something only a child living in fear could recognize, the difference between danger and someone who knows what danger feels like. He walked toward Jack's booth. The truckers stopped eating. The waitress stopped wiping. The cook peeked over the grill. Even the radio seemed to lower its voice. Jack blinked as the boy stepped closer. His instinct was confusion. Most kids either feared him or avoided him. But this one sought him out. The boy reached the booth and stood there silently. Jack set his coffee down. Slowly, "You all right, kid?" No answer. Instead, the boy lifted his sleeve, and everything inside the diner cracked. Bruises. Dark, fresh, painful. Shaped perfectly like the grip of an adult hand. The kind of marks left not by accidents, but by cruelty. A long, heavy silence fell. Jack's jaw tightened. His pulse slowed. His breathing steadied the way it used to before a fight, only this wasn't anger. This was something deeper. Something sharper. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly. The boy hesitated, and when he spoke, his voice was so small it nearly vanished. "Dad." Jack felt that word hit him like a punch. He had seen those eyes before, in mirrors, years ago, when he was a boy trying to survive the fury of a father who didn't know love, only rage. He had lived through fists, nights hiding under beds, running into streets just to get away long enough to breathe, and this boy, this trembling, bruised boy, was living the same life. Jack stood up from the booth so slowly it was almost reverent. He knelt until he was eye level with the child. "You're safe now," he said, voice softer than anyone in the diner thought he could speak. "You hear me? You're with me." The boy's lip trembled, but he didn't cry. He was too used to swallowing emotions to let them spill. Jack reached out a hand. The boy stared at it, weighing trust against survival, and then he placed his small palm into Jack's rough, scarred one. Decision made. Jack tossed bills onto the counter as he told Marlene, "If anyone comes asking for him, call the police. Don't let the man near him." "Yes, Bear," she said, breath shaky. Outside, Jack lifted the boy onto his Harley. The chrome glinted like a blade against the dull morning. Jack strapped the helmet onto the child carefully, then climbed on himself. The engine roared to life, the ground vibrated. The diner windows rattled, and as Jack pulled onto the highway, the wind washed over them both like a cleansing wave, carrying fear away behind them. The journey into the mountains was long and winding, but the boy held onto Jack's back with a grip that spoke louder than words. "Don't leave me. Don't let me fall. Don't let him find me." Jack didn't speak either. Sometimes silence is the only language broken hearts understand. When they reached the secluded valley where the Hells Angels clubhouse stood, the rumble of engines echoed like a warning. Several bikers turned their heads sharply, surprised to see Jack returning with a child clinging to him, but in his eyes, they saw something unmistakable: purpose. Inside, Jack wrapped the boy in a blanket and sat him by the fire. The heat softened the stiffness in the child's posture. The flames reflected in his tired eyes. Nobody asked questions, and when Jack finally spoke, his voice rumbled low, "No one touches this kid again. Not while I've got a breath left." The room fell still, not from fear, but from loyalty. Hours later, the boy finally found the courage to whisper his name. "Ryan." Then the story trickled out, quiet, steady, heartbreaking. A dead mother. A father drowning in alcohol and rage. A home filled with shouting, broken bottles, locked doors, and nights where sleep came only from exhaustion. When Ryan finished, he didn't cry. Jack did, not visibly. Not openly. But something cracked inside him. Something old. Something he had buried. The bikers didn't speak. They didn't need to. The next morning, the roar of 20 motorcycles filled the narrow street where Ryan once lived. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as the father stepped outside, his face draining of color. Jack approached him, not to hit him, not to threaten violence, but to speak the truth the man had run from for years. "You hurt that boy again," Jack said, voice heavy as thunder, and you won't have to fear me. You'll fear yourself. Because I promise you, your life will fall apart long before I ever lay a hand on you. The father didn't answer. Couldn't. Not a punch was thrown. Not a threat was shouted. Sometimes the loudest message is delivered in absolute silence. Ryan stayed with the club for weeks. The men taught him how to ride, how to laugh, how to breathe again. They called him Little Wing, after an old Hendrix song that played one night while he sat by the fire smiling for the first time. Eventually, one of the bikers and his wife, unable to have children of their own, adopted Ryan. They gave him a home, safety, warmth, and a life free from fear. But the night Ryan left the clubhouse, he hugged Jack tighter than he had ever hugged anyone. "You're my angel," he whispered. Jack swallowed hard. "Nah, kid," he murmured, voice thick. "I'm just a man who didn't finish his coffee." Years passed. Ryan grew into a man who helped children for a living, a social worker with steady hands, a soft voice, and eyes filled with a strength he earned the hard way. But every year, on the anniversary of the day he walked into that diner, a Harley parked quietly near his office. A small toy motorcycle would appear on his desk. No message. No name, but he always smiled, because he knew, somewhere out there, an angel in leather still watched over him.